We are morally bankrupt now. And a lot of the younger parents now that you see, do not want to offend little Johnny or little Susie, and they put them on the same level as they are. They include them in things that they want to do. They don't want to deny their kids anything.
Thank you for tuning in to the Removing Barriers podcast. I'm Jay.
And I'm MCG.
And we're attempting to remove barriers so we can all have a clear view of the cross.
This is episode 186 of the Removing Barriers podcast. And in this episode, we will be discussing firearm safety and parental responsibility.
Hi, this is Jay. MCG and I would like for you to help us remove barriers by going to removingbarriers.net and subscribing to receive all things Removing Barriers. If you'd like to take your efforts a bit further and help us keep the mics on, consider donating at removingbarriers.net/donate. Removing Barriers, a clear view of the cross.
And now,
the starting lineup for your world champion Chicago Bulls. Edgar, 6'6", Michael Jordan.
And now, 6'6" from North Carolina. The best there was, the best there is, and the best there ever will be. Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, welcome to the Removing Barriers podcast.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. Unfortunately, I'm the short, white, poor one, and can't jump, and not very, very wealthy, obviously. So,
and you said you were Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan was Michael Jordan.
That is correct. That's correct. Who knew? Who knew? I guess I should have tagged along with his name later on in life, I guess. So.
All right. So that we don't get sued, you're not from North Carolina, you're not 6'6", and you're not the Michael Jeffrey Jordan.
That would be correct.
But Michael Jordan nonetheless.
Yes, that is correct.
All right, well, let's jump right into it. Let's start by telling us, how long have you been in the firearm industry and around firearms and stuff like that? Let's start there.
Well, I'm 74, and I think I probably shot my first firearm at my grandfather's place, probably when I was 7 years old. Had a chance to shoot shotgun, rifle, and pistol, and really, really enjoyed it. And then when I was in college, I did a little bit of small game hunting, obviously. And then after I got married, slowly started a firearm collection and going out with a whole lot of fellows just to do a lot of plinking and so forth. And so from that, it kind of elevated over the years. I started to compete in various firearm disciplines in rifle, pistol, and shotgun, and really, really enjoyed it and started to develop a fairly good collection that I shared with my family. That we have 3 sons, and so all 3 of the boys learned the basics of firearm safety and got a chance to go ahead and experience a whole lot of firearms personally. With that being said, the odyssey was such when we were first married, like most young married couples like yourself, you don't have a lot of excess income. And so when I started to get certain weapons, we lived in a townhouse. We didn't have money for a safe, and so all the weapons were sequestered inside of a closet. They were up on a shelf. The ammunition wasn't anywhere close to the weapons themselves, but it was one way to do it. And the kids all knew where the weapons were, and we spent a lot of time with them. This is where they are, and you're never to tell any one of your friends that we have weapons in the house. And if we ever see you touching one of those weapons or opening up that closet to see them, there'll be great consequences. And they would ask, what? And I said, to be determined. But they all respected those wishes. And when we would go out and shoot, I would ask one of them at a time if they would like to go shoot. So you could go ahead and focus your instruction on one child versus all 3 at once. So from that, out of the 3, the middle son, at one point in time in middle school, for the science project, he wanted to do one on the ballistics of a particular round. So we went out to the range and we developed some loads and shot at 50 yards, 100 yards, and 200 yards just to see what the bullet drop was in those various range distances. And so he did very, very well. And when we were in the science fair, one of the science judges was a military officer. And so when he came up, I was standing next to my son, and I was going to go ahead and explain everything to him. And he said, I don't hear it from you. I want to hear it from your son.
Oh, wow.
And so he did very, very well, which showed that he was listening. And then our youngest son, he was the Virginia State Junior Air Pistol Champion. And so he got the opportunity to go down to Atlanta in 1996 and shoot in the Junior Olympics air pistol match, which I believe he obtained 5th place out of 50 shooters, which was very, very interesting.
Yeah.
So given all that right there, the boys, all three, they all have their own firearms now, and they all have kids, and they have spent a certain amount of time trying to instruct those kids not only in marksmanship, but more importantly, firearm safety.
And what's your favorite weapon that you have right now, if you care to share?
Well, there are so many. It's kind of like your children. You know, which one do you say is your favorite one right there? You know, they each have their own characteristics that you're pleased to have, but primarily I am a pistol shooter for the most part. And everything else is kind of ancillary to me. And so, but probably my favorite pistols that I enjoy shooting are the 1911 Colt pistols, you know.
Cool.
That were, you know, developed by John Browning back in 1910, I believe. And that basic design has withstood the test of time over 100 years and is still an accepted firearm, not only in competition, but self-defense and other military uses.
You know what they say?
What's that?
God made man, but some will quote,
made them equal. That is correct. That is correct.
All right. So tell me, Mr. Jordan, how much burden or responsibility do you think should be placed on a gun owner, someone who carries a gun, owns a gun? How much responsibility should that person have?
100%. There is no doubt. You know, you can have a firearm, which is a weapon. It's no different than your vehicles parked outside, their weapons. You wouldn't allow your children to go out there and drive those vehicles around the block until, one, they achieve the proper age and receive the instruction, and you were satisfied that they had the abilities to safely operate that. It's the same with, you know, firearms, you know, that I believe with my complete body and soul that every child should be afforded a chance to learn good gun safety before they even grasp a weapon, you know, that they have to go ahead and see what a weapon can do. Now, you both know, being shooters, that you can take a loaded weapon, you can lay it right here on this table, and it can stay here for 1,000 years. It's not going to hurt anybody. It's not going to go off. It's going to remain very safe there. But with kids, you know, kids are inquisitive, you know. And back when I was a kid, which is probably different than you, we played cowboys and Indians and military guys, you know, and we all played with guns, plastic guns, play guns. And then you would generally leap into a pellet rifle or a BB gun, a Daisy Red Ryder, which is a gun, you know, and just a little segue from that, we provided BB guns for all of our grandsons, not for the granddaughters. We figured if they wanted to learn, they could certainly use it, but wanted to go ahead and do that. And we gave one of them a bullet trap so that they could learn basic marksmanship under the tutelage of their father, you know.
Are you being misogynistic, not giving your granddaughters?
Well, had they shown any interest? Okay. Now, also, while we're on that line, one of the girls that my son shot against in Atlanta, very, very nice young lady. And I was talking to one of the medical doctors that was there to help to score the targets. And he made a good point that I never thought about. You know, women have the ability to work out of both sides of their brain, you know. And so when young men are out there shooting, they're holding up the pistol and they're thinking about their favorite sport team. They're thinking about one of their good buddies, about some girl that they like. But the girls can go ahead and segment that out where they can just focus on their shooting. And historically, you know, they shoot much, much better. And we see a lot of the world-class shooters, one that we previously mentioned at church, who is a world-class shooter, and she can shoot rifle better than I.
Is that why my wife can shoot better than me?
No, I just think that she's better than you. So, but anyway, that is the basic background. But, you know, it's truly incumbent upon all parents, you know, one, if they want to teach their kids, they have got to teach them safety. And if they have no interest in teaching the child, if they own one, first off, they should be responsible gun owners. And responsible gun owners is not throwing it in your nightstand loaded or putting it underneath your pillow at nighttime or, you know, in the glove box of your car. Having a farm requires some responsibilities. And if you're not prepared to take on those responsibilities, then you shouldn't have one. And that's why certain states, they do a very, very good background check to check on people to see if they're not only legally, but if there's anything hidden in their past that would preclude them from having a farm.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to make clear, we're not talking about gun control in the sense of the government imposing more regulations in order to make it more difficult for people to get firearms. We're talking about individual gun owners taking full responsibility for their firearms and for each round that firearm can fire, making sure that it doesn't get in the wrong hands, making sure that in whatever way they can to prevent that firearm being used for destructive or sinful or destructive reasons. Do you think that firearm safety laws should be multiplied and strengthened? Or do you think that we have enough in the country as it is?
Well, my personal feelings is that we've got enough gun laws out there if they would just enforce those gun laws. Mm-hmm. We can't go ahead and say, well, this gun law didn't work, so let's go ahead and impose another gun law. Right. Because, really, if all the gun laws we have, if you did a good inventory of all the gun laws throughout the U.S., it's hundreds, if not thousands of gun laws. And most of them, it's tough to enforce those laws because most of law enforcement officers really have no idea because they're not exposed to those things. Mm-hmm. It is only after there is some devastating accident or something that results in them starting to dig through the annals of all the laws we have to see what these people can be charged with, which is very, very sad. It's kind of like closing the door after the dog gets out.
Right.
Right. And you can't do that. So I really don't think that would correct the problem. It would just create another layer of bureaucracy that would never be enforced, would never be used. That is my own opinion.
Okay.
But I really do think that basic marksmanship should be offered to anyone that gets a firearm, and I've seen that at a lot of the indoor ranges back when I didn't belong to a gun club, where you would go in there and you could just take a look at the ceilings being shot up, a lot of rounds bouncing off the floor, right, and shooting at a target that's 10 feet away that looks like it was a shotgun because they were just, spraying and praying.
Oh, goodness. Just yesterday, we saw a video on YouTube of someone who was shooting a steel target, and he was probably 10 feet away. And the ricochet actually ended up hitting him and killing him, unfortunately.
Yes.
So, it's definitely a safety.
Yes. And, to legislate something like that, I don't think you can do that because there's too many gun owners. I think that they figure that there's roughly 370 to 400 million weapons in the United States right now.
It's more than we have people. Yeah.
Truly. Well, that's throughout the years from the first time that a weapon was made. Mm-hmm. And so it would be interesting to see how all those stats match up with the accidental shootings, with accidental stabbings, accidental car wrecks. There's just so many things. And where does the focus belong that you can prevent some of these things? I don't know. If I knew, I would be writing a book about it.
Mm. So we have enough laws. We just need to be enforcing them.
Exactly right.
And maybe even repeal some of them because it's just too much. We're trying to legislate it a little
very, very onerous. Very onerous.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, but it seems to me that the laws, even if they enact them, who's going to obey those laws? Law-abiding people.
That's correct.
So it's not going to affect the people that are already breaking the laws.
That is correct.
So, I have a clip here from our current Vice President, Kamala Harris, and when she was the DA in California. So I'm going to let you listen to it and give me your opinion.
Responsible behaviors among everybody in the community, and just because you legally possess a gun in the sanctity of your locked home doesn't mean that we're not going to walk into that home and check to see if you're being responsible and safe in the way you conduct your affairs.
Have you heard from...
So what do you think about that? She said that not because you have a gun in your locked home, that doesn't mean that they're not going to go in and walk into your home and check and make sure you're being safe. Overreach?
Much. Because there are certain segments of the parties there that want to take care of us from cradle to grave. And that includes going into our rooms, our houses, right? Whether it be into our bedrooms or to our living rooms or our dens or whatever have you. And that does not denote freedom to me. That is not freedom. We should be able to enjoy certain rights. And if we don't have certain rights and we're going to have these onerous laws imposed upon us, then our democracy is dead at that point.
So we've heard of kids, like you alluded to before, you're not being a good and safe gun owner if all you do with your weapon is, throw it under a pillow or put it in your nightstand. We've all heard of kids getting a hold of weapons and accidentally shooting themselves or shooting a friend or shooting a sibling. Now, can this be prevented with government intervention, or should it be prevented without government intervention? We hear Kamala Harris wants to come into our homes and make sure we're doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. Can that sort of thing be prevented if she were to actually implement something like that?
I don't think so, because most of the people that want to impose these restrictions, they're not really gun owners. They're just overreaching, and that's not going to solve the problem. It's going to require a whole lot of other elements to fall into place. Specifically when somebody buys a weapon, segue off of this for just a second. I was in construction for many, many years, and one of the meetings that we had a union welder that gave a speech, and it was very, very good. And he came in there and he said, okay, these are a set of cutting torches here. He said, this is one of the most dangerous weapons you can ever get. Anyone can go into any welding supply store and buy a set of gauges and the cutting torch, and then rent a tank of acetylene and a tank of oxygen, and they can go to town cutting steel, And he said, there's so many inherent problems with that if you don't know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. It's one of the worst weapons that there can ever be. And he talked about he was working at the shipbuilding yard, and he was told to cut an access hole into a large tank. And he said, I'm not going to cut into that tank until I see what's on the other side. And so they said, okay. So they opened up hatch and went down there, and there was about 3 gallons of JP3 jet fuel down there.
Oh, wow.
My.
And so if he had cut into that, he probably would have been killed, and probably anyone around there would have been killed as well, too. So there's responsibilities on everything, and there's not too much we have out there. Well, it's the same thing as knives. If you have a sharp cutting knife in your cutting board, and one of your kids is playing around and actually falls on it, then he could be greatly injured or, perhaps killed. It's the same thing. It goes with all things right there. There are so many things that can end up being weapons, and to try to instill proper safety in those requires, I personally think, a lot of personal responsibility, And where do you leave that? I think that you probably learn that from your upbringing, from your rearing. If you're coming from a good family structure where they're going to go ahead and teach good values for anything that you do, and not be afraid to discipline. I'm not talking about physical discipline, necessarily, but have discipline. If you're not going to follow the rules, you're not going to drive the car. You're not going to pick up this weapon at the range. You're not going to pick a knife out of the cutting board. So it takes to instilling or inculcating a lot of personal responsibility to your children.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that what Kamala was saying overlook is the personal responsibility that everyone have, regardless, of whether they own firearm or not. Because as you say, if you don't own a firearm, you own other weapons that can be used, weapons of opportunity that can be used as stuff, and they don't regulate Clorox, bleach, and Clorox can be pretty deadly, depends on if a kid get a hold of it.
Oh, certainly. I've seen that a lot. There's a lot of self-defense classes that they give to women, and they walk into their vehicles, that if they've got to defend themselves. And I was watching a guy that I knew, and he was showing how a woman, when she's walking to her car, could interlace her keys through her hands and make a fist so that if someone tried to grab her, she could punch at the eyes, and things like that. But getting away from our discussion here, it still requires personal responsibility that you're going to properly teach. Now, whether or not you're telling people when you sell them a firearm, if there is a affidavit saying that, and this would also help the gun seller too as well, by signing this document, you will validate the fact right there that you're the sole owner, and should you allow anyone else to use this weapon, that you will properly instruct them and do everything within your power to make sure that the weapon is used properly, and that you will make every opportunity to make any of the weapons you have secured where they're not readily accessible. And whether or not they would wish to sign that and saying that if I ever get called in court because I sold you this weapon, I can say, listen, we specifically talked about this. Would any dealer want to do that? Most likely not. Most likely not. But there is always the possibility of being sued for anything you have. There was a few years ago, there was a young man who got his father's weapon. In fact, we've seen more and more of these cases where he shot and killed a couple Fairfax County police officers up in Westfields. I don't know if you were around here then or not.
Probably not. Doesn't sound familiar.
But the father had purchased the weapon. In fact, what we're seeing, too, the same thing on the attempt on President Trump, too. You know, the young man was using his father's weapon, and his father would routinely let his son take that to a firing range because he had no idea that the kid had other ideas in mind.
Right.
You know, and you really don't. And if the kid is of that age, you know, we have adult kids, and if my kids said, hey, listen, you know, we want to go out hunting in Montana, do you have a couple rifles that we can use, or do you have some 22s so we can squirrel hunt? Or, you know, I would gladly go ahead and do it because I know in my heart of hearts that they're going to respect the firearms and not use them improperly. And I hope to go to my grave and say that my weapons have never been used where I had to take another human being's life.
Yeah, definitely. I think at the bigger picture as well, here, what Kamala was saying as well, why it's so egregious, not only the fact that she's taking the responsibility from you, but she's actually violating two of our rights in terms of not only the Second Amendment, but your Fourth Amendment right to be free from search and seizure. And it's just scary that you will go to that length to ensure that someone is securing their firearms, but you would not go to the same length to say, okay, what about the chemicals under the kitchen counter? Are you going to make sure that those are secure properly? What about the medicine in the medicine cabinet? Are you going to make sure that those are out of reach of kids? Why is just guns, you know?
It truly would open up Pandora's box.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Because once they get their foot in the door, they're not going to remove that foot.
And the government's not known for their restraint or for their restraining themselves from abusing or using whatever power is given to them. So certainly it would open Pandora's box for sure.
All right. Well, you're listening to the Removing Barriers podcast. We're sitting down with Michael Jordan. Not the Michael Jordan, but Michael Jordan nonetheless. And we're talking about firearms and parental responsibility. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for a consistent and reliable place to get all your Christian materials? Try ChristianBook.com. Started from humble beginnings in 1978, ChristianBook.com now offers a wide range of books, CDs, DVDs, homeschooling, and church supplies, plus more. So whether you are a parent, a homeschooler, a pastor, or a layperson, ChristianBook.com can be a one-stop shop for all your needs. Click the link in the description section below and check out the vast array of Christian materials ChristianBook.com has to offer. Do you have the desire to earnestly contend for the faith which was once delivered unto the saints? Answers in Genesis can help. They provide biblically sound books, CDs, DVDs, homeschooling materials, VBS materials, online courses, digital downloads, and the Answers magazine, and more. Plus, tickets to the Creation Museum and Ark Encounter. Go to the Answers bookstore by clicking the link in the description section below, so you too can be ready to give an answer to anyone who asks the reason of the hope that is in you.
All right, so let's pick it up. Let's dive a little bit into some recent cases, recent happenings that we see that parents have been charged somewhat for the actions of their kids, whether it's teenage or younger. The first one I want to talk about is James and Jennifer Crumley. They're the parents of Ethan Crumley, who was charged and convicted of manslaughter. Well, the parents were charged and convicted of manslaughter and are now serving 15 years in prison for the actions of their son, Ethan. So just a little bit of a backstory. On November 30th, 2021, 15-year-old Ethan Crumley brought a handgun to school and shot and killed 4 Oxford High School students and injuring 7. Apparently, the 9mm SIG used in the shooting was bought by Ethan's father, James Crumley, on Black Friday as an early Christmas present. And here is a news clip of the happenings.
The deadly school shooting in Michigan at Oxford High School. That's about an hour north of Detroit. 3 students killed, at least 8 others injured, including a teacher. An alleged lone gunman, a 15-year-old student, is in custody at this hour. Police say he was armed with a semi-automatic handgun. Multiple agencies responding to the call of an active shooter, ambulances in the driveway, the school principal getting on the PA with the code word for lockdown. The stories coming in at this hour of students barricading themselves inside, teachers putting paper up to cover the windows of classroom doors, then barricading the doors with tables. Some students climbing through a window, running for their lives across the snow. Others carried out on stretchers to the ambulances waiting outside. And of course, that sadly familiar storyline, students taken to a nearby location, this time a supermarket, to wait for their parents. We saw some of those reunions today. ABC's Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas leading us off tonight.
All right, so there you have ABC News stuff. I'm going to play the rest of it, but basically set the stage, Ethan Crumley bought a gun, but here's the rest of it.
Today at yet another school, students, teachers, and parents terrified and scrambling after shots fired on campus.
They're requesting medical assistance. Multiple ambulances if possible.
This time at Oxford High School, some 40 miles north of Detroit. This video showing students in the classroom running for their lives. Local TV stations breaking into programming.
We're now looking at, at least 8 law enforcement officers with long guns who are entering the school.
3 students killed, 8 others shot, including a teacher. Student John Edwards describing the chaos to our affiliate WXYZ.
Over the PA, we hear our principal, Mr. Wolf, shouting, "Alice, lockdown, Alice, lockdown." And then we heard the gunshots in the class. And so we locked down, turned the lights off. Our teacher got paper, taped over the window on the door, and got his 2 big tables and barricaded the door. I was just scared. I was praying for, my safety, my friend's safety, everyone's safety.
Edwards able to call his mother.
I could hear the fear in his voice. And I told him, I said, "Baby, I'm on my way. I've never been so scared in my life."
School officials left reeling.
Of course, I'm shocked. It's devastating.
The suspected shooter, a 15-year-old sophomore at the school, allegedly armed with a semi-automatic handgun.
He fired multiple shots. We're thinking, 15 to 20 shots that were fired.
Trayshawn Bryan telling a reporter he was worried something would happen at school today, so he says he stayed home.
So apparently it seems like, I don't know how this guy knew, but it seems like maybe social media or something. But anyways, I'll continue.
Hearing that there was going to be a possible shooting at the high school?
Yes, I did. I heard it multiple times.
An emotional Governor Whitmer on the scene late today.
I think this is every parent's worst nightmare.
There have been no word yet on motive, and there was no struggle during the arrest. But we're told the suspect quickly asked for an attorney. Tonight, police are conducting a search at the young man's home. But at this point, they do not believe that anyone acted with him. He acted alone. David?
All right, Pierre Thomas leading us off tonight. Pierre, thank you.
All right, so Michael Jordan, there you have it. Ethan Crumley got a 9mm SIG for Thanksgiving, basically early Christmas present. Somehow got a hold of the gun, took it to school. The parents were charged with manslaughter, convicted for 10 to 15 years, sentenced to 10 to 15 years in jail. Firstly, tell me overall feeling of this story, and then do you think that the parents were responsible here? Dive into that.
Well, without knowing the full transcript of the trial, obviously, but I think that there was a preponderance of evidence to convict them of that manslaughter. Now, there was a weapon. Now, clearly the young man knew how the weapon functioned, how to go ahead and load magazines, how to rack the slide back, go ahead and load one in the chamber. So at some point in time, he got some instruction. And with the weapon, obviously the weapon was not secured, or maybe they were under the false impression that their son would not want to use that weapon for any kind of nefarious things. But like we see in most cases there, if we were riding with someone that robbed a bank, we would be involved in the conspiracy for that too as well. So by mere fact, I'm not quite sure why they sent both parents, but it sounds like to me there was a preponderance of evidence that both parents were complicit in letting this child use that weapon. And you just mentioned the young man who decided to stay home. He must have seen something in this guy's background. It was similar to like the Columbine shootings, where these kids were at home with long black trench coats on and odd-looking things there. Certainly if you saw your kids in your house going into their bedroom and dressed a little bit oddly, you would probably go in their bedrooms just to see what they were doing because you're responsible parents. Well, obviously, I don't think that these people were responsible. And whether or not they offer these people a plea deal or not, but I do really think that they are complicit to that. And whether or not they'll serve 5 years and get out, I have no idea. But they have responsibility. We all have responsibility. I am sure that, most people that I know that have weapons have them secured somewhere where the children do not have access to it. And as we, alluded to earlier, you just have to impose some safeguards and teach them good firearm safety and teach them right there that they're not going to use these things until they're old enough to purchase the weapon by themselves.
That's interesting. So just a little bit more background, because I think from what I remember that on the day of the shooting, I think he was taken to the counselor or the nurse or whatever they have on the school because he was making some drawings of a gun with a round coming out, and he was, putting, drawing of killing people. And I think the parents were called and he denied he had any intention or whatever the case may be. And then shortly after they left, he went in the bathroom, got his gun out of his handbag, and that's when he went and did that stuff. Another background here is that he seems to have exhibit some mental issues, and his dad still got him a gun. And not only that, you're talking about, of course, the parent did take him to the range, which none of that is illegal. Taking your son your teenage son to the range and teaching him how to shoot a gun, none of that is illegal. I think, again, when I look into the child, it seems like what the prosecution was saying, or the DA was saying, is that they weren't charged because they were his parents. They were charged because they feel that they were complicit in his actions. I guess maybe for the but-for rule. But I'm conflicted on this because I don't know. I guess I should look this up. But I don't think, from what I researched, that they had him storing the gun in his bedroom. I think the gun was probably stored with them or in the nightstand or whatever. And he took it without permission. That's the impression I'm getting from what I'm hearing the parents saying. I'm conflicted with it because you have her, what is a 15-year-old young man, making a moral and conscious decision to go and hurt somebody. And because you're the parent, and I know the prosecution is saying not because the parent, but it come across that way because you're the parent, you're being charged for that action of someone who already know right from wrong,
Well, you're right. Well, we all know you're responsible for your children. You're responsible for your children's actions. If one of your children go out and throw a rock through a window, you're responsible for that because they're minors. And we see more and more of these minors that, get charged with something and they get put in a juvenile jail. And when they turn 18, it's all expunged. And they're back on the street again, which is, I think, very, very bad because the mental conditions that they had that caused them to do these things, they're still going to be around after they get out of their 3 or 4 years of confinement. But parents have got to really know that there's consequences to their kids' actions. And we all do, whether or not one of your kids is driving your car and is involved in a hit and run, you're probably going to be charged in some way or other. Why did you give that child the keys to your car? Because clearly it's a weapon. Didn't you know? And there's probably a real fine line between where you would charge and where you wouldn't. And I'm sure that that's probably would be defined by the type of counsel that you could afford when you go to court. But the bottom line is, I still think that the responsibility falls upon you as a parent. It's imperative that you teach your children properly to avoid things like this. We take a look at the Uvalde shooting too as well down in Texas. Very, very tragic. But apparently this kid, they showed the telltale signs of a young man who was troubled,
Yeah, but even in that case, the mom at this point, she wasn't charged. But again,
no, she wasn't.
The argument was that I think he was actually 18.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Sue Klebold, which is the mother of one of the Columbine shooters, had a TED Talk where she said that she had no idea how her son had changed as a result of hanging out with the other boy. I forget his name. His name is slipping me now. So she made the claim that she had no idea how much her son had changed. A lot of parents, in retrospect, let me back it up a little bit. Let's take kids who commit suicide. A lot of parents will go back and say, I never realized, I missed all of these telltale signs. In retrospect, hindsight is 20/20, of course. Now I see there was a problem. If the parents are in the dark about the mental condition of their child, should they still be held responsible? Because it says here that this boy's mother, Ethan's mother, received texts from him in March that would indicate that he had a shift in his thinking. But those are the accusations brought against her. She didn't say that she realized those changes. But there are people that are looking at the texts that she received and said, oh, you should have realized at that point that there's a shift in his thinking and that he might be more, I don't know, more liable or more likely to commit such an act. How much can you hold parents responsible for the mental state of their children, especially if they don't even know what to look for?
Well, that's a good question. I'm going to let Michael jump in on that. But I'll say this, though. I'm actually interested to hear your opinion on this because you already raised your kids.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of times as parents that we deny the signs we see in our kids. So we will have the idea of, well, my kid wouldn't do that. I raised him better than that. And I guess it comes down to the fact that we deny the flesh that is within them and that they won't subdue to the carnality of the flesh. And we know as Christians that, hey, we are all sinners and we are all bent is to go into that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And, our pastor would always say, his parents would tell him, I don't trust you. Today that might sound like child abuse, telling your kids you don't trust them. But I think if a lot of parents go in with the mindset that I'm not going to trust you because you have a flesh, and I'm not going to trust the flesh, maybe she just look at that and say, well, it's my son. I raised him better than that. He knows better than that. I'm going to deny the fact, at least internally, deny the fact that there are signs that he might do harm.
Well, looking at this, I was raised as a child of the 50s and the 60s, obviously. And I think that parental controls were a little bit greater than they are now. I mean, my parents did not put up with anything. And yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. We respected our neighbors. We were taught you don't steal, you don't do it. So I think that the moral fabric that we have has been impaired or if not destroyed. We are morally bankrupt now. And a lot of the younger parents now that you see, do not want to offend little Johnny or little Susie, and they put them on the same level as they are. They include them in things that they want to do. They don't want to deny their kids anything. And in fact, I can still remember saying, well, Johnny's parents let him do that. Well, we're not Johnny's parents.
Yeah.
And we're not going to put up with that. And, as a kid, there was always that veiled threat that if I do something wrong, the wrath of Khan is going to come down on me hard, And I think a lot of the younger kids now, unless they are raised, and I believe truly, in a good Christian home where they start to learn some real solid values and morals, you're going to see more of these things because it's clearly, in my opinion, it's Satan at work, and I'm sure that each one of these killings that we see, I'm sure that Satan's got a big smile on his face.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd like to piggyback on that.
Sure.
I think people that were raised, and I don't want to do the, back in my day type thing, but there is something to be said for kids being raised today compared to kids that were raised in the 50s, 60s even, maybe 70s, 80s, we begin to see a shift. But back in the day, it seemed like children who would have that shift in their mental state, they would be just, they're going through something, parents would see that, and there would be that constant interaction between kids and their parents. Today, we're so distracted with our technology. There are many adults that are behaving like children, and they're out gallivanting about and leaving kids to raise themselves. And so maybe if there were any signs, they just didn't see them because they were out, partying or doing whatever themselves.
Or they don't want to see them.
Or they don't want to see it. That's another thing as well. There's a difference.
I think it's more what you said. I think that they have a blind eye to that. My little Johnny wouldn't do this. My little Susie wouldn't do this. They know better. And, your moral fabric, it takes years to improve. In fact, it's very, very interesting. And I've heard a whole lot of pastors say this, that kids are raised in the church. And every May we see them congratulate all the high school graduates and college graduates and postgraduate degrees. And most of the pastors I've ever seen have said, just look around. Probably 50% of you will probably fall away from the church and probably will never come back.
The statistic is actually higher. I think Ken Ham did a study, was almost 90%.
Oh, is it 90?
Well,
wow.
Is it almost? Okay,
definitely much higher than 50.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Well,
anyway, let's continue the discussion and talk about Colin Gray. Colin Gray is in jail, charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts of second-degree murder, and 8 counts of cruelty to children. What happened, you may ask? Well, on September 4th, 2024, Colin Gray's son, Colt, 14 years old, brought an AR-15 style rifle to school and opened fire, killing 2 children and 2 teachers. It is notable before that the Jackson County Sheriff officers, this was in May of 2023, visited Colin and Colt Gray because it was reported that Colt, then 13, had made remarks on social media platform, Discord is the name of that platform, about wanting to carry out a school shooting. At that time, when the officers interviewed him at his front door, Colt denied it was him in the presence of Colin, his father, and the officers. I have more to say about that, but here is a news clip of that encounter as well.
New information came during a hearing for Colt Gray's father, Colin, in front of a Barrow County judge this morning. Let's get out to Fox 5's Tyler Fingert, who joins us live from outside the courthouse with the night's new details. Tyler?
Yeah, Tom, good evening to you. We learned shocking details about Colt Gray and his mental state when police say he shot and killed people inside Appalachia High School last month. Investigators say he meticulously planned his heinous act.
He entered that classroom and proceeded to fire the rifle into that classroom.
Armed with an AR-15 style rifle, investigators revealed Wednesday alleged mass school shooter Colt Gray had a plan when he started his rampage inside Appalachia High School last month. GBI agents say Colt wrote it out in several notebooks and even drew some sketches.
We also found another notebook in that same room. It was a drawing of a rifle with what appears to be ammunition coming out of it, and then the word kids.
Investigators said Colt didn't just plan how he was going to take lives, but how many families he would shatter.
Under the classroom column is written 15 to 17 killed, injured, ? 2 to 3. Further down the page is written classroom 2, 3 to 5 killed, injured 2 to 3. And in parentheses off to the side, it says, surprised if I make it this far.
Agents say family members knew about Colt's deteriorating mental state, but he didn't adequately get the help he needed. Prosecutors ultimately charged Colin with a number of counts, including involuntary manslaughter. Agents testified Colin knew what was going on, then still bought Colt a gun, ammunition, and other accessories.
In that body camera, when he was talking to you, did he appear to express any remorse about what had happened?
No, he did not.
Investigators say Colt had what they describe as a shrine dedicated to past school shooters. A GBI agent said Colt's mom and dad knew he obsessed over them, but felt he was just joking. Colt's mom, Marcy Gray, told the GBI her son asked his dad to buy a, quote, shooter mask.
When she asked him why he needed that, he stated in a joking manner, "What? I've got to finish up my school shooter outfit. Just kidding."
And after hearing all of this, the judge determined that there was probable cause for Colin to stand trial. Meantime, a grand jury is set to meet here tomorrow to determine that the father and son should be indicted on more charges. Tom and Courtney.
Yeah, some alarming testimony, Tyler, in court today. Besides those drawings and writings, do we know of any other evidence that prosecutors have?
Yeah, Tom, that's a really great question. I think prosecutors definitely have a lot of evidence to work with in this case. One of the other things they mentioned that they have is surveillance video. So think about it. On a school campus, there are cameras. And not only were there cameras in the hallway, but there were also cameras actually inside the classroom, which was shocking to me. So they actually have video of the actual shooting happening inside at least one of these classrooms. And again, those pieces of writing and also those sketches are something that they're going to be able to use and be able to present to a jury when this does eventually go to trial. And one of the things we weren't able to mention in that story was a piece of evidence that they gathered at the home of Colt Gray, which was a crumbled up piece of notebook paper. I'm reading it off my notes here, which they said, quote, expletive, this life of mine. Obviously, prosecutors are going to be using that to show his state of mind when all of this unfolded on that campus of Appalachia High School last month. Guys, back to you.
The details are just so chilling. Tyler, thanks.
All right. So, of course, you heard that. So, to me, personally, when I compare Colin Gray with the Crumblies, you can argue that Colin Gray, you had your local sheriff come and talk to you, but because of that, then the son deny it. I guess you can call it Tim Walz moment, aka a knucklehead moment, where he went out still and got an AR-15 style rifle for his son after you have officers coming to your door to question your son. And in his defense, he said he got him a gun so he can toughen up a little bit, because if you look at the video, it seems like Colt, the son, is either transitioning or he's at least on that spectrum somehow in the LGBTQIA stuff. So he identified either gay or transgendered, and I'm sure if this have anything to it. But let me hear what you have to say on this thing, Michael.
I think that all the signs were there, clearly. And how many times do the parents have to be informed that we've got some problems? You know, if you start seeing that your kids have a shrine in their house to school shooters, and you start seeing certain drawings and you're hearing it from the police, you're hearing it from the schools, you know, how many red flags do you need to say, we need to stop, we need to back up, this child needs some serious psychological help? And now if he was transitioning, was that spark that someone made some kind of despairing remark about his sexuality, and, you know, where he said, well, I'll show them. You know, you just don't know what the breaking point was for him to go ahead and take that action. But nevertheless, you know, from what I can see here and what I've read about that case, you know, there were so many warning signs and there was so much evidence that this kid would probably do something very, very bad. You know, if not taking someone else's life, may very well take his own life.
So you think the parent here was justified being arrested and charged?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I do.
Do you see any contrasting difference between this one and the Crumbleys, the first one?
You know, they're the same but different.
Yeah.
You know, basically they're the same but different. To what level? Let's say that the Crumbleys, you know, their actions were at a 3 and the Grays' actions were at a 10 plus, you know, but still their actions, had they taken proper actions or responsibility, maybe that wouldn't have happened. But perhaps it was, because obviously anyone can get a weapon right there. You know, we've seen that more and more, you know, the inner city, you know, kids that are in that thug kind of life, they can get access to any kind of weapon that they want.
With Glock switches and everything.
Yes, true. And I've known a lot of law enforcement officers in big cities, and a lot of these kids, you know, if you want a carjack, we'll rent you a gun.
Oh, wow.
You know, we'll rent you a gun just for each job. You know, we'll rent it to you for $50. And you can use it and then bring it back. And then you can take the stolen car somewhere and sell it to a chop shop or something. So there's various things there. You know, criminals, you know, it's tough to get all the bad guys in jail as fast as we let them out of jail, you know. But to get back to your main point, yes, I think the Grays are certainly more complicit in the actions that occurred that resulted in deaths. And, you know, I think that they should have to pay for their actions, not only in jail sentences, but monetary problems that they had right there. You know, I think they should lose everything, you know, their house, their incomes, and everything else, you know. They should be sued for the damages, you know, and we see that a whole lot, you know. If you have someone that is drunk driving or whatever and wrecks into your car and kills a spouse or a child, you know, you go after them tooth and nail, you know, 1, to see that they're charged accordingly, and 2, that there's some financial responsibility that they have to take in this. But that's just me.
There seems to be something similar between the Grays and the Crumleys in that both of the young men seem to have spent a lot of time alone. In the case with Ethan Crumley, he was left alone so often that she actually called Child Protective Services out of concern for him. And in this case as well, he was left alone for long periods of time. So there's this element of alienation and...
on devices.
Yeah, on the devices as well. And that's enough to warp anybody's mind. Even grown adults is enough to warp anybody's mind.
True right there, you know, and it's very, very interesting, you know, that we're seeing right there that the preponderance of these actions are happening to young men, you know, young men that are going through puberty and things like that, and they're being harassed. And I mean, I can remember being in school and seeing some kid being bullied or whatever have you, and you would step in and say, well, if you want to bully somebody, go ahead and bully me, you know, and generally it stops. But there's no one that can really help a lot of these kids, you know, because sometimes they'll talk to their parents and they're told, well, you just need to toughen up. But then again, in this electronic age, you know, got all these kids playing all these video games, Grand Theft Auto and things like that. And where suddenly life doesn't have any value, you know.
Right.
and some of these war games and thuggish type of things. So I think that the kids that get locked on a computer or an iPad or their phone or an Xbox or whatever have you, it certainly does go ahead and slant their views on life,
Sure.
And just to kind of segue off that for a second, we all remember when that young man at our church right there, a military veteran, and had some emotional issues. And everyone, I think, around knew that he had some emotional issues and were doing everything that they could to try to help him, and he did have firearms. And when we had a fellowship at the range one time, he was down there, and I specifically talked to him. And by all appearances right there, he seemed to be fine. But I understand in retrospect, they thought that he had a whole lot of demons that, in his personal life, as we heard, where he was in one branch of the military and then transferred to, another. And it was very, very sad his ending of his life that, in fact, I can still remember when he spoke at that fellowship dinner. I think it was a week before he killed himself.
Days, actually.
Days, yeah.
Day or two. But
yeah, very, very sad. Very, very sad. And so it's tough to get into the psyche of anyone, I think. And I think that we've all been thrust into dark times in our life, and unless you have Christ as a crutch, you're going to fall deeper into the abyss, I think, a lot of the times. And unless you're getting the encouragement and coming from a Christian family, and I honestly believe that being raised in a Christian family has got more impact on most kids, and clearly you're going to have exceptions to that rule. But, if you have a structured family life where you limit the time on, electronic devices, which I'm sure that you do with yours probably, and/or TV and some of the things that they're watching, and unless you start taking a proactive approach to that, I think it's going to result in a lot more of these things, and a lot of these cases that we see right there are just the ones that are highlighted. At the end of our meeting here right there, I've got some stats right there that in your time, I'd like for you to go ahead and read the stats. And the stats were a little bit alarming, so we're only seeing the top shelf stuff right now.
Oh, boy.
Right. So that's my personal opinion. And, for me, if I had to choose between which one of these I think that are most outrageous, for me, of course, I would say definitely Colin Gray seems to be more in a situation because the way I try to answer the question is that I put myself in his shoe. If I had police officers coming to my door and saying that they suspect that my son is making threats and planning to do a school shooting, I think I know myself well enough to say that I don't think I would give him a gun that same year as a Christmas present.
Agreed.
Go back to what I said earlier. So it could either be that this was strong denial, that he didn't believe his son. Of course, hindsight is 20/20. So I guess all hinged on whether he believed his son or not, because his son denied that he did it. But it seems to me that there were a lot more red flags here, including shines to school shooters. Who does that? That's just extremely dark and evil that you do that, and asking for the parents to buy him a mask to complete his school shooter outfit. That to me are signs that the parent will say, you know what? Maybe he's not really mature enough for him to have access to this gun that I bought him. So to me, yeah, I would say Colin Gray should have been charged and I'm most likely going to be convicted. But I'm going to be honest, I'm torn because I see it as a slippery slope. When we start charging people that have, I guess, agency, as the law will probably put it, being charged, and other people are being charged for their actions. I don't know. I just feel like it might be a slippery slope, but I can understand, at least in Colin Gray's situation, that he was definitely a knucklehead. But being a knucklehead is not necessarily illegal.
Well, that's true. But step back for a second and take the stance of the parent who lost a child that day. What stance that you would take right there,
Yeah, but yeah, I could do that. But then you're asking me to make an emotional decision rather than a decision based upon what should be legal or not. And I guess what I said, of course, if it was my child, I would want these people to be buried under the jail. I understand that. So I'm looking at it more like taking the emotions out of it. Because if you put emotion in it, that doesn't really mean it's, emotions, they're what they are. So I'm trying to look at it from a point of view of, let's say a parent accidentally, let's say you came home from the beach or whatever, and you were trying so much to get to the bathroom that you take your gun off of you and you put it on a shelf and your kid get a hold of it.
Mm-hmm.
am I going to be charged with something like that because I was rushing to get to the bathroom and make a knucklehead decision and the kid get a hold of the gun? That's a slippery slope I'm looking at.
Sure.
Of course, in Colin Gray's situation, I would agree with you. I think that, he should have seen the red flags because I think they were there, especially if having police coming to my home. I would say no. Even for me personally, before I had that fishing accident, before I lost all my guns, I had all my guns locked up from my kids. But I just see a slippery slope here where it can lead to government overreach. So I'm a little bit concerned about the fact that they're being charged. But at the same time, I can understand why, especially in Colin Gray's situation.
Well, I like to look at the legal system, and still my personal feelings are that although the legal system does have its issues and its problems, I don't think that the parents would have been charged unless there was a preponderance of evidence that they could be charged, and one they could be charged, and one that they would be convicted. And I'm sure that they were afforded counsel on this, and if there was any way that the charges could be dismissed, I think that their counsel would have come up with something to go ahead and to get the charges either dropped or reduced. So I think that based upon the evidence, from what I've read, and again, we don't have the benefit of the full transcript,
right?
But we can just see, when there's smoke, there's fire. Now, clearly, we've all seen cases where people should have gone to jail and they were found not guilty. But, we've got to trust in some type of legal system to go ahead and protect us anyway.
Yeah, and I would agree to you if the legal system wasn't so political and it wasn't guns, because we know, look at Kyle Rittenhouse.
Yes.
Everybody would have guessed that Kyle Rittenhouse was an innocent man, but he was still dragged through the legal system. So, again, I'm not defending Colin Gray. I'm not defending the Crumbleys. I just have concerns about the slippery slope because, of course, you say, okay, there must be the preponderance of evidence to charge them and stuff like that. But at the same time, we can also say, well, it could have just been political. It could have just been, you give your kids a gun, and parents, I don't want no longer giving kids a gun. So now I'm going to start charging parents because of that to deter the action, even though it's not illegal. So while I can say, yes, trust the legal system, at the same time, we see people being charged just because a gun was involved, and the legal system, the DAs and the prosecutors not being honest and stuff.
Well, I don't think that there is a vehicle that's available right now to do anything but to charge the parents. That's my personal feelings. Someone's got to pay, and that's what they're looking at anytime. We're seeing this right now with Daniel Penny in New York City, and why he's even on trial just defies anything I've ever seen. But there's people that want to get their ounce of flesh out of someone. And yes, the legal system, I think, is more broken than it's fixed, in my opinion.
I was just going to quickly say, in each of these cases, isn't it true in the country that minors are not allowed to own guns?
You can purchase long guns like rifles and shotguns when you're 18 years of age.
Right.
But pistols is 21.
Yeah.
It's clearly
federal law.
Yes.
Well, I mean, we're talking about a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old. Mm-hmm. Why was there unrestricted access to these weapons? And not just the weapon, but ammo as well. Even on that basic level, I could see the parents should be held accountable.
Well,
even if they purchase it for the child, let's say you purchase it for the child, you're supposed to keep that weapon secured. You take them to the range for them to fire the weapon together, and then you bring it back and secure it. But in this case, they were able to pop into, well, if they were even secured, I don't even think they were.
To where responsible.
Exactly. So,
well, I can still, as a kid right there, I can still remember going to buy 22 rounds so that I could go ahead and shoot 10 cans.
Mm-hmm.
And
they would sell those to you back then?
Well, back when I was like 16 years of age, we were.
Oh, wow.
I remember, but you had to have an ID and sign.
Mm.
And I remember going to a range one time and they had silhouettes of people to shoot. And I thought, well, that'd be good to go ahead and try. Well, if you bought one of those targets, they wrote your name down too.
Right.
So they could see if you were planning anything nefarious. They would, if anyone was ever charged, well, this person here, they got a target, for the past 6 months, they were in here every night, shooting. Must have been they were planning on something. Well, they may have been something as innocent just to being able to protect themselves, if they were ever thrust into things like that. But it still goes back to the basic premise in my mind that being a parent requires a lot of responsibility.
Yep.
And you are responsible, not from cradle to grave, but cradle to adulthood when they're off on their own.
Right.
And as tough as that may be, and you have to go under the format that anything that they do is going to reflect upon you as a parent, and we have seen more than once right there where, we see a child that parents let them run free and you think, well, what's up with that?
Right.
And although just a little thing that I heard one time, we had a pastor one time who said this guy was on a subway in New York and he had like 5 kids and the kids were running around the subway and bouncing off the wall and being real crazy. And so one of the people in the subway said, what are you going to do about those kids? And he said, I really don't know. We just buried their mother.
Oh, yeah. I actually remember that story.
Yeah, do you? Right there. And so until you walk the mile in someone's sandals right there, you really don't know what's going on. So it's not a black and white, cut and dry answer to this. It's, you could have a forum of 40 people in here right now, and we'd start hearing things from both sides. What is the answer? I don't know what the answer is. I wish that I did. And everything that I'm giving you today is my personal opinion, and you're getting what you pay for.
Well, it can't beat the price. But definitely, I would agree with Jay said. Definitely, if you're going to buy your kids a gun, I think you should at least, inspect what you expect, or at least in that case, I would say so. But again, we're talking about teenagers. And of course, I would not do it, but I can understand. But anyways, let's go on to this one, because I think this one, we probably would all agree on this one. But we have Deja Taylor. So Deja Taylor accepted a plea deal and pled guilty to felony child neglect and received 2 years in prison. Deja was sentenced to 21 months in federal prison for lying on a 4473. And for those who have never filled out the 4473 is basically the form.
The federal form.
Federal form you fill out for a background check whenever you buy a gun from an FFL dealer. So what happened on January 6, 2023, Deja's 6-year-old son somehow got a hold of her gun, took it to school with the intention to hurt his teacher. He shot her. The bullet went to her hand and into her abdomen. Here's a news clip about this.
Developing tonight, the mother of the Rich Neck Elementary School shooter pleaded guilty this morning to felony child neglect. Prosecutors say Deja Taylor told investigators she typically kept her 9mm handgun in her purse with a trigger lock, which her son used to shoot his teacher, Abby Zwerner.
Right now, Taylor is the only person currently charged in connection to this shooting. Ann Sprocka went to the hearing today. She's in studio with us now. So, Ann, how much time in prison could Taylor face?
Well, Dan, Janet, the maximum penalty for a child felony neglect case is 5 years, but prosecutors agreed to recommend up to 6 months in prison for Deja Taylor. During the court hearing today, prosecutors also described what the boy told investigators the night of the shooting.
For the first time in several months, we're learning more about how detectives say the Rich Neck Elementary first grader got access to his mother's handgun the day of the January 6th shooting. In court Tuesday morning, the boy's mother, Deja Taylor, pleaded guilty to a felony child neglect charge. As part of the plea agreement between attorneys, prosecutors dismissed the other charge of recklessly leaving a loaded handgun in reach of her child.
She feels very responsible, feels very bad.
During the hearing, prosecutors said Taylor told investigators the night of the shooting she typically leaves her handgun inside her purse on her dresser with a trigger lock, but still didn't know how her son got a hold of it. They then said the boy told investigators he climbed his mother's dresser and took the gun the night before he shot his teacher, Abby Zwerner. In the hours after the shooting, detectives say they even heard the boy say, quote, "I stole the gun because I needed to shoot my teacher." Taylor faces up to 6 months in prison if the judge stays within the prosecutor's recommendations. The 26-year-old mother also faces 18 months to 2 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to charges of lying on her gun permit paperwork about using marijuana. Taylor's attorney, James Ellenson, says the judge could take that case into consideration when sentencing Taylor on the child neglect charge.
That, I guess the thought would be that if she does have to be incarcerated, maybe the federal system would have more opportunities for rehabilitation and counseling and things of that nature.
Now, Ellenson didn't respond directly to our questions about how the child got a hold of his mother's handgun. In response to this guilty plea, Abby Zwerner's attorney sent 13 News Now a statement saying, quote, "As the criminal probe widens, our focus remains on justice for Abby and holding the school system accountable for failing to act on warnings that the boy had a gun." I'm Ann Sprocka for 13 News Now.
All right, so, Michael, there you have it. So we have a mother with a 6-year-old son somehow got a hold of a gun. This one is wide-ranging because She was a marijuana user, lied on the 4473. That's a crime. So she shouldn't have had that gun. But also she left it in a position where her 6-year-old son could get a hold of it. And then you talk about the depravity of the child. You know, of course, we as Christians believe that we are all sinners, born in sin and shaping in iniquity. But 6-year-old, and you could already plan that you're going to go to school and kill your teacher. Jump in and give your overall thoughts on that.
Well, first off, you know, the mother certainly had some problems, starting with lying on the 4473, which we've also seen with one Hunter Biden, you know, the same type of thing. And, you know, you see routinely people are caught doing that. And anytime you fill out that form, you're generally counseled, in fact, right there, please answer all these things truthfully. And if someone would say, hey, how do I sign this? No, we cannot counsel you how to answer it. Answer it as honestly as you possibly can, because there will be repercussions if you're not telling the truth. And the fact is, you know, she was a marijuana user, and by all accounts, I believe she was a single mother, I believe.
That's correct.
And, you know, she said that she had a trigger lock and key right there. I don't think she ever had a trigger lock and key.
That.
You know, I think that in that case, they searched for the trigger lock and the key, and they never found one. I think it was real convenient to say, yes, I'd go ahead and do that. And if,
I would say this, though. I think that she got the gun with a trigger lock.
Oh, yes.
Because most big box store, when you buy a gun from them, they
do. Right. Yes. And I don't think I would endorse that statement.
Right. But I don't think one was on the gun when the kid got a hold of it.
No. You know, and I got to believe that if it was in her purse and she's a single mother, you know, if she was going to use it for self-protection, you know, the time it would take to fumble around on a key to take a trigger lock off the pistol to protect yourself could mean the difference between life and death. I don't believe that she ever had it on there. You know, it was convenient. She was probably instructed to say that, you know, when she was arrested, but she never had that. And more overreaching was the fact that her son clearly had problems. Her son was firmly aware that she carried a pistol, and that's something you as an adult, you probably wouldn't want to broadcast that around.
Right.
And tell your children. So she was, I think, treating her son as an equal in many regards. And he probably saw her take it out of her purse and fondle it and spin the cylinder and load it and unload it. And so I think that he was firmly aware of what she had, and she probably would practice shooting it right there. Again, I'm just writing a story, obviously, right there. But I think that she was really, really complicit in this, you know, that she could have stopped that. If the weapon had been properly secured, this probably would never have happened, you know. The kid may have taken a baseball bat on the playground right there and bopped her upside the head or something, but he never would have used a gun. I think, in my view, that just the federal crime that she committed, you generally get, you know, 24 months on those things. So if she only got 21 and they're trying to get her out, and, you know, I never heard the full story about the kid. I'm sure that the kid is in some kind of detention somewhere. I got to believe.
No, he's 6. The last thing I heard was he was being cared
he
for
was his grandpa.
By his great-grandpa.
Oh, great-grandpa, right.
Yeah.
The thing for me was, let me just say that we did an episode 152, Deja Taylor versus Hunter Biden, a case of class. So if you want to go back and listen to that sometime, of course, we did that episode earlier. But it baffles my mind how at 6 you can already plan that you're going to kill somebody. You mentioned video games earlier. I don't know, how do you become that depraved that early? You know, it speaks to the home the kid was being raised in. It speaks to a lot of things that the government and society don't want to touch on. Because at 6, you know, I'm a father and I had 6-year-olds, and I don't think that anything like that was on their mind. Not saying they aren't capable. I'm just like,
yeah, but you're raising your kids in a atmosphere where they're not exposed to a lot of that. You know, you're not letting them watch a lot of shoot 'em up shows on TV and things like that. Now, bear in mind, you know, when I was a kid, I used to watch Westerns, used to really, really enjoy Westerns, you know, cowboys and Indians and doing that and all the war movies. Now, that never incited me to want to go ahead and kill anybody. I mean, my buddies and I, we used to always play those games, you know, but it was make-believe. But I think that a lot of the environment these kids are being raised in now, they're being exposed to a lot of outside videos and things that have a grave impact on them. You know, I honestly believe that. And their classmates too, you know, and they're all trying to, one, either blend in or stand out in their crowd. And I'm sure a lot of these kids probably talk about that. And sadly, you know, a lot of the inner cities, that's the environment that they grow up in. There's a lot of drive-by shootings. and various other things where these kids are swimming in those waters and they grow up saying, well, I'm going to have to learn how to protect myself. And as soon as I can get a weapon, I'm going to do it. And that is a failure on society's part. And I don't know how to possibly fix that. But we've got more single parents now than we've ever had.
Right.
And the whole fabric of the family, used to be really, really central right there, regardless of race right there, the whole fabric. And now the fabric of the central family is being disintegrated, regardless of race. And that's very, very sad right there. You see a whole lot of single mothers, single fathers, and, and they're paying the price for that now, I think.
Yeah, I think about it because, I don't know, I guess you can blame TV, you can blame video games, but there's something just is really off there for me that the 6-year-old would have that thought. But of course, let's compare the three now. So we have the Crumbleys, we have the Grays, and now we have
Taylors.
So for me, should Deja be charged? I would say absolutely yes. The kid is 6. The others, you can make the argument they're teenagers. They have agency. But a 6-year-old, I don't know. I was listening to a podcast the other day and he said, how do you know if you can control your kids? And they say, if you can still pick them up, you can control them. I can understand.
Well, that's in the physical.
Right. So 14, 16, I can understand. But 6, something is not right there for me.
But, a 6-year-old is just as sinful as a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old.
That's true, but
what I'm saying is if we're all equally depraved, right, we shouldn't be necessarily surprised that a 6-year-old who can't, at that age, I would agree, can't regulate his own emotions. That's clear. Probably much less so than a 14, 15-year-old. We shouldn't be surprised that if he's that angry about something, it would make sense that he would pick up a gun and try to solve his problem. Much more so than a 14 or 15-year-old, I would imagine.
I think it speaks to the environment the kid was raised in more than...
I think it's a little bit more than that, right? Because let me push back on what Michael Jordan said here. You said you grew up on Westerns and war movies. That is a visual depiction of people shooting others, people shooting each other. And you didn't grow up to be a school shooter or anything that crazy, or you didn't grow up to kill anybody. I grew up with very little filter in terms of what we watched on TV, and I didn't grow up to... So there's something else missing there. There is a grounding element in our lives that we experience that these kids don't have. We mentioned how the Grays, Ethan Crumbley and Colt Gray, were left alone for extended periods of time with this device in their hand warping their minds. And no real family interaction to ground them, to pin them to soil. Otherwise, their mind would just, go off into a tangent. I imagine that this 6-year-old was probably no different.
Well, it came out that he had behavioral issues. Even ignoring all that, the fact that at 6, you are able to think about this, plan this, and execute it. I can understand a 14-year-old doing that because at that point, you already start thinking logically and stuff like that. But to me, a 6-year-old, more so than a 14-year-old, make this decision because of the environment he's growing up in. To me, he's doing it because maybe that's what he's exposed to. Maybe that's what he understands from the rap music and the music that his family listens to. And I think that is more of environment than so much that, of course, we believe that all of us are sinners, but I can't imagine his mind is so depraved that way at 6 without the environment.
But I promise you that Ethan Crumbley and Colt Gray didn't have, great taste in music
they were older.
either. Yeah, they were older, but there's really no difference in how that sort of thing. Okay, let me backtrack, right? I guarantee you, if we go through the movies and the music that the Crumbleys and the Grays listen to, they're just as sinful, just as crazy as what we would expect a little boy here to be exposed to. Well, the only difference is the genre. On one end, you've got rock, let's say maybe pop music. And on one end, you have rap. On one end, you've got Boys in the Hood movies or thug or gang movies. And on the other hand, you've got Westerns, or in their case, maybe the video games with the Doom and the Grand Theft Auto and all these different things. What I'm saying is the soup that they're swimming in is no difference. It's all filth, right? And so the 6-year-old would be more likely to figure out that, I can solve my problem by my teacher wants me to do my homework and I don't want to. There's no emotional control there. And so I'm going to solve this problem by grabbing the gun. Well, the 14 and 15-year-old, of course, there's a little bit, I'm not saying that they can fully control themselves. They're still children, but more so than a 6-year-old, right? We shouldn't even be, what I'm getting at is there's no difference between them. I don't see much of a difference between them, except for the age.
Well, I think that all 3 cases, all the kids were a product of their environment, and it was very, very overreaching right there. It was the environment that they experienced in school and the environment they experienced at home.
Yeah.
And those two things coupled with their mental state, obviously,
was
they
like
didn't.
The gasoline, right?
Yes. And, was a perfect storm. And with this latest case that we just discussed, that young man that went to school with the pistol, if his mother kept it in her purse, that creates a lot of weight in that purse, and you as a woman right there, you put in one thing in your purse right there, you can tell if something is missing just by the weight. And if her son went to school that day and she grabbed her purse, she would have known, why is this thing so loose there, and why wasn't she alerted to the fact, well, where is it? Did I drop it out of here? And contact the school. So, there's more to this story that was never exposed again, unless we had full review of the transcript of the trial. And, personally, I think in many regards, she's getting off very, very light.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very light right there. She's, it could have been a whole...
Part of it was because she accepted responsibility? Because it seems like...
She took a plea deal.
She did take a plea deal, and since it was a federal rap, too, for the most part. But, that coupled with the child shooting, but I think they were putting more weight on the federal charges, I think, than the actual shooting. And had the teacher been killed, it would probably been a different story.
Sure.
But I believe the teacher, she's suing the school board for $40 million or something, I think.
Yeah.
I think.
Because the kid had behavioral issues.
And according to her, they did nothing.
Been to the principal office. But again, going back, I'm going to go on to the last story here.
Okay.
Going back, when he shot the teacher, the 6-year-old said, I shot, and he used the B word for a female dog.
Yes. Yeah.
Dead.
Mm-hmm.
That speaks to, I don't know, to be using that language at 6.
Oh, he's definitely heard it in the house, for sure. Yeah.
Oh, there is no question.
No question.
No question. Well, we see a lot of these kids, and clearly, I was in construction, and a lot of the women in there would cuss like drunken sailors just as much as the guys were, and I'd ask some of these girls that were working, I said, do you eat with that mouth? I said, I don't know why you want to degrade yourself like that.
Yeah.
But we've seen the whole thing, and you can be in a whole group of people walking in the mall or whatever on the street, and the language is deplorable. And you're right, the kids are raised in that environment, and they're swimming in those waters. How do you expect that they're going to be?
Yeah. They
want to identify with the adults,
Yeah.
Okay, so for me to be a big man or big girl right there, I got to talk like they do, I got to do this, and, and it's very, very tragic. And these are the people that are going to be running this nation, which is sad.
At some point, yeah.
Yes.
It's
sad.
all the same soup, yep.
All right, well, this is another story. This has nothing to do with firearms, but I want to compare and contrast because I guess I'm the only one saying that I see a slippery slope here. So I'm going to try to tie this in with other firearms. So here's the news article.
An Anne Arundel County homeowner calls for accountability after police say 4 juveniles in a stolen car crashed into his home while his family was asleep. All 4 suspects were released to their parents, something the homeowner calls unacceptable.
Tonight, Fox 45's Jessica Babb has an update on that investigation. You can still see the aftermath out here after police say teens stole a car, that car then crashing into a truck, the truck then plowing into the home. You can even see these car parts out here on the sidewalk still. And if you take a look at the home, it's now been boarded up and you can see that blue tarp. I talked with a homeowner earlier today and he says someone could have been killed and says when it comes to the teens in the car, there need to be more consequences for the crime. On the corner of Church Street in Brooklyn, with wooden boards going up and car parts still scattered around, Lamont Brown and his family are now without their home.
Our whole lives are in there, so right now we're going to a hotel, but I don't know.
Police say this damage was caused by 4 teens caught in a stolen car.
Like, you don't got nothing better to do on a school night. My whole family was at risk. That just makes me even madder.
And while the teens ended here, they started just down the street on Cram Avenue. Police say around 2:50 Friday morning, they got a call about someone tampering with a car.
I jumped up awake to my sister screaming that her car was being broken into and we need to come outside.
A car belonging to Noah Lander's family.
They broke in with the screwdriver to get the ignition out, but we had just got the update on it about a month ago. so they weren't able to, so they got back in and left.
And while he says they weren't successful stealing their car, police say when they got to Cram Avenue, they saw a black sedan leaving the area. Minutes later, that black sedan with 4 teens inside hitting a truck. The truck then plunging right through the doorway of Lamond Brown's home near his living room.
I don't know how fast they were going, but they were going really fast.
Brown says he fell asleep on the couch Thursday night, but woke up around 1 a.m. The crash happening less than 2 hours later.
I could have been gone. I could have been dead.
Emergency responders telling him his home, with his family and young kids sleeping upstairs, could have come crashing down.
We were all asleep in my room right when this happened. Like, my fiance, so all the weight was right there from all our body weight. So, and they hit the supports right below us. So if it would have came down, we'd have came down, been on top of the truck.
Police arrested 2 14-year-olds, one of which was driving, a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old. Police say the car they were driving was stolen. While all 4 of them were given juvenile citations, they were later sent home, released to their guardians.
They needed to spend a couple nights in jail, something. They needed, even if...
So, teenagers, 13, 14, and 16, 2 14, 1 13, 1 16, they were cited and sent home. This happened in Maryland. Let me finish this and we'll talk about it.
Even if they're not with the general population, they need something. There's no fear instilled in them. Like, they did it, and then they went home to their house that's not damaged.
While a spokesperson from Anne Arundel County Police says the juveniles will still have to appear in court when notified, they couldn't tell me if any of these kids have had prior offenses. They say they don't have access to juvenile criminal history records.
If you get a tap on the wrist, you're going to do it again. Like, definitely needs to be more accountability.
Brown says
you got to keep your kids in check.
Officials say 5 people were taken to the hospital. And as for Brown, he says he's going to be dealing with these consequences day after day. He says it could be weeks or even up to a few months before he and his family can get back into their home. In Anne Arundel County, Jessica Babb, Fox 45 News.
That's crazy. I'm looking at a picture of it. That truck looks like a freight train hit it. They were definitely speeding, and half of the truck is inside of the front door of the house.
Yeah, but my issue here now is that I'm tying in this. That's why I'm saying it's a slippery slope. Because why weren't the parents arrested here and charged? Because you're talking about the same age as Ethan Crumley and Colt Gray. The parents are not in jail. These teenagers were basically slapped on the wrist and say, here's a citation, go home. And I'm like, if firearms were involved, they would not have been sent home. But they did as much damage as a firearm would have done. This is where I'm like, you know what? Either they're attacking the gun because of political issues, because to me, as it's saying, go, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. These teenagers should be in jail. Their parents should be held accountable if that's the standard we are setting.
You're saying that the state is not applying this hold parents accountable
across the board.
And that they should or they shouldn't? Or
I'm saying if that's the standard, yes.
Okay.
If that's not the standard, well, that's not the standard.
Okay.
And I understand it happened in Maryland, which is one of the most liberal states in the country, but...
Well, that's true. And the fact is that the kids did not take one of the family vehicles, apparently. They stole a vehicle, and you could try to defend that case right there. I didn't know my kids were even out there doing that. But there should be consequences against the kids.
Negligence. You don't know where your kids are. Negligence.
Yeah. Well, there is, because you're responsible for the actions of your kids.
Your kids, yeah.
Okay. That if, as we talked about right there, if your kids are out here one day and they take their baseball and break every window in the house next door, then you're going to be called to go ahead and replace all those windows.
Right.
As you as parents, should there be something, we haven't heard the rest of the stories, but I've got to believe that these people that are thrust out of their dwelling, somebody's going to have to pay for that. Their insurance company will probably pay for the repairs, but they're going to go after someone. And I would think that they would go after all the deep pockets of all those 4 kids' families and say,
if they have deep pockets.
Well, if they have deep pockets right there, or they would be charged. I would think that there's more to this story, that the parents are going to have to pay back some monetary value for all this damage. Once again, the fabric of the legal system is anything but just in many, many cases, and we see that more and more. And we see it on the West Coast where they just passed that Prop 36 or whatever it was, where they have all the people that if you steal $1,000 or less, you can walk or you get a no cash bail.
That was just repealed by the voters, though.
But, Gavin Newsom didn't want to see it. And
of course not.
And I don't think, that Harris did either, because she was the one that was trying to raise bail for all these people that protested for the January 6th damage that was being done. Not January 6th.
George Floyd riot stuff.
Well, yes.
You said January 6th. I just want to correct.
Well, the January 6th, the post-January 6th, where they were in, Seattle and Portland and damaging, damaging all the buildings and trashing right there. And they destroyed federal property. And I never saw where anyone was charged with it. When they burned up cities, when they burned up stores, they looted them all and then burned them to the ground. And there was one case, just a little aside, there was a guy and his girlfriend that were responsible for destroying a Wendy's. They went in there and they burned it down to the ground, which resulted in over, I think, $3 million damage to the building and the loss of some 25 jobs for the people that work there. And apparently in the court case, and I'll find it for you, the judge gave them each a $500 fine and 3 years probation. Explain that to me. How does that work? If it was any one of us, we would be under the jail right now.
Sure.
But once again, firearms is something that I can speak to right there, because once that round leaves that barrel, you can't call it back. But something like vehicular theft and damage that, I think that the parents have got to be prepared that sharp attorney is probably going to go after them for their work. And so, or if they don't, then perhaps they have somebody set up a GoFundMe page or something, which I don't understand a lot of that either, so.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, Mr. Jordan. In light of everything that we've talked about here, we're talking about alienated kids being held captive by their technology, parents providing weapons for them, access to the weapons, even though there is a marked shift in their mental state and in their mental clarity. Do you think that parents should be a little bit more vigilant, or should they assess their kids' mental states before purchasing weapons for them or allowing them access to weapons, in your opinion?
Oh, certainly they should be. You have to be proactive. You have to be very, very proactive in that.
You know how, though, some people will use firearms as a therapeutic sort of thing. Let's look at the situation with Chris Kyle, who was killed by someone who he was trying to help, had mental issues, and took him to the range as a form of therapy. So there is the argument that perhaps having the weapons, having that as an activity can be helpful to their mental state. So I could see that side of it as well. But do you think that parents should be evaluating their kids' mental states and either providing access or withholding access, depending on what they see?
Certainly. The responsibility lies fully on the shoulders of the parents. You have to personally assess whether or not they have the mental state, they have the maturity in which they can do things. And if they demonstrate, and we get a bunch of kids out there and they're slinging weapons around, and I've seen adults too. I have trained a lot of adults too. In fact, another little fast story. I've got a friend of mine who was a cop in D.C., and he was also a command sergeant major in the Army Reserve. And he was in charge of a big MP unit. And he said that they were on their month training or whatever have you. And he was asked to go ahead and to qualify a doctor in his weapon usage. And he said that he met the guy out there, and the first thing the guy did, the doctor right there, he swung the weapon around in his face right there, And so he said he grabbed the weapon and he slapped the guy upside his head right there, and said, don't do that again, keep the pointed down range, And he did it again, and he pulled the weapon out of the guy's hand again and slapped him upside. This last time I'm going to ask you, point the weapon down range and let's go through this. And had to spend a lot of time before the guy could qualify. And he said it wasn't 15 minutes later after he finished up that the CO had the CSM in his office. And he said, I understand that you slapped the major upside the head. And he said, sure did. Twice. And he said, well, tell me the story. And so he told the CO the story. And he said, after the second time, you should have knocked him out. And, it's true. Yeah. But adults can be just as irresponsible. Sure. And I'm sure you've seen this too. But firearm safety is something that cannot be taken lightly. Yep. It's got to be something. And you need to start at a very, very young age with kids, even if they have toy guns right there, just to go ahead and explain to them right there. Don't point it at your brother.
Yep.
So.
We do that with our boys. It doesn't matter if it's a toy gun or even if it's a stick. We'll take walking sticks out onto the trails that we go to. Hey, don't point that stick where you're not, get them in the habit of being very careful with whatever it is they have in their hands.
Well, that's because you're responsible parents.
Right.
And you don't want anything to happen right there, but that's not going to ensure that something will not happen.
Will not happen. Anything can happen.
But you have to take every precaution and do everything in your power right there to instruct your kids the right way. So a day's in, you can say, I've done everything that I can do. And then if something happens, then you're going to second guess and reflect back on everything that you've done and said, where did I make the mistake?
Yeah. All right, Mr. Jordan, let's wrap it up. What's the bigger picture here? What's the takeaway from all this? Let's put a bow on it.
Well, I would have to say that with all the current affairs that we are being seen on children causing damage in schools, that it requires some way to make parents more vigilant and more responsible, not in just firearms, but in anything of their kids' life. Anything that would throw their children out of kilter, that would possibly result in them causing harm to others or themselves. And we've seen both of that. But bottom line is, it's got to begin at the home, that the whole fabric of the family has got to be restored, because back when I was a kid, you never saw any of this. Mm-hmm. And I think that was due in part because the fabric of the family was much better. Families did not put up with a lot of nonsense with kids. I'm sure that you guys were probably raised too. Your parents probably didn't want to debate anything with you. Their word was the law,
Right.
And it was either their way or the highway, And so bottom line is, will that help to restore and reduce some of this stuff? I don't know, because I think that the culture is there right now where you're starting to see a lot of this. So bottom line is that it's going to require more vigilance with the parents, I think.
All right, definitely. Well, MJ?
Yes, sir.
Michael Jordan, the one that can't jump?
That's right.
Thank you for joining us on the Removing Barriers podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Great.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Removing Barriers podcast. Did you know that you could find us on Twitter, Gab, Parler, Facebook, and Reddit? Go to removingbarriers.net/contact and like and follow us on social media. Removing Barriers, a clear view of the cross.
Thank you for listening. To get a hold of us, to support this podcast, or to learn more about Removing Barriers, go to removingbarriers.net. This has been the Removing Barriers podcast. We attempted to remove barriers so that we all can have a clear view of the cross.